So this evening is a rare and beautiful beast. We have a bit of a hybrid, kind of part book club, part special event with the author. So I would ask everybody here and also the wonderful book club of the Bondi Literary Salon to just be patient. We're going to go with the flow. This is going to hopefully for you, Meg, is going to be a nice fluid, juicy conversation. So before we get started, what I would like to firstly do is to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our land and pay our respect to the elders, both past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and hope of their people. What I would also like to do now is warmly welcome the wonderful Meg Mason.
Thank you.
Who I have a really embarrassing girl crush on. I'm going to, you can cringe now. I'm just going to go back into the chair.
The object of the girl crush when I'm so inclined to be crushing in the other direction.
Okay.
It's fine. It's a nice change.
You can just enjoy the crush, bask in the crush for a moment while I introduce you. So from New Zealand, Meg began her journalistic career at the Financial Times, the Times of London, very impressive. Her work has since appeared in the Sunday Times, the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Sunday Telegraph. She has written humour for the New Yorker and Sunday Style, and was a GQ columnist for 5 years, and is still a regular contributor to Vogue, Marie Claire, and Elle. Her first book, in fact, all 3 books have been published by HarperCollins. The first, Say It Again in a Nice Voice, a memoir of early motherhood, was published in 2012, which I absolutely loved, and I've had a peek at. Her second book, You Be Mother, which I loved even more, which was so bold and beautiful, written in 2017. And now, amidst the craziness of 2020, we are graced with Sorrow and Bliss, also published by HarperCollins, which has been described as dazzling, distinctive, boldly talented. And for those that enjoy Sally Rooney and Fleischmann's in Trouble author Taffy Brodesser Acne, and compared to Phoebe Waller-Bridges with its Fleabaggian wit.
Fleabaggian. Isn't that the adjective we've needed for so long? Fleabaggian just captures everything I could ever hope to do. But anyway, I'm running ahead. I'll let you actually ask the question before I answer one.
Well, I'd love you to just carry on with that. So what is it like to be compared to Fleabaggian Phoebe?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I think obviously, have we all seen Fleabag? It was so astonishing when I first saw it. But I think that what you have to just put all of those things away when you're actually trying to create something of your own, because you could never sustain, if you sat down to be like, I'm going to write something Fleabaggian, you just could never sustain it because it isn't really yours. And so you'd be just trying to sort of clone it and keep going back to watch how she said this and how she did that. So it's lovely that that's what people see in it, but it definitely wasn't something I could ever have set out to do. And Sally Rooney is interesting because she's such an arch millennial, sort of, you know, the voice of her generation. And I'm like, not my generation. So I love her, and she's definitely created something new. But I feel like I don't, when I see her books, I don't almost know what I'm looking at. I can't recognize the characters. And so I sort of, and when I read it, I ended up feeling quite despairing. I don't know how you all felt about it, but I felt quite sad at the end. And I wanted, I think, Sorrow and Bliss to have a more hopeful ending. So I hope that's been achieved. It's hard to know. I think so.
Well, let's circle back to that intention, which was about creating a hopeful ending and a story that has so many rich complexities that are both hopeless and hopeful all the way through. But before we go any further, I just want to welcome this person in. We're just welcoming some latecomers.
Why are you late?
Yeah, just for our audience, we've got a hobbling person coming in. Oh, I don't know. I had to
everyone online.
I had to just check I was being politically correct then. I didn't realize. Okay. So before we go any further, what I'd just like to do is just do some housekeeping. So for everybody in the room, not you guys on Zoom, the bathroom is just at the back if you don't know that already. Please be mindful that the dryer is literally louder than an airstrike. So just go steady with that. And if you can, you know, use it, but use it quietly. Also, if you do need to come through for any reason, can you do your absolute best not to kick the steps over and ruin the whole Zoom connection?
Leave that to me. That's absolutely my job.
We'll put that in the next book.
Yeah,
okay,
for sure. I'll kick that over at some point.
We're going to start off with as much as we can, a fluid conversation. If you are literally, you know, falling off your seat or furious with what I am not asking or what not's coming out, and you literally can't help yourself, just, you know, just let us know. But please know that what we intend to do is chat for about 45 minutes and then open it up to the Zoom audience for questions. What you need to do is type in your questions and they'll be told to us. And for the audience, you just need to put your hand up. Could I please ask, we have such a limited amount of time. Can you construct your question really specifically, succinctly, without a background story? Just because I have to repeat it for our Zoom audience and it will take away from time listening to Meg.
But I do want the background story afterwards.
Yes.
If we get to chat afterwards.
Yes.
I 100% want the background story. That's my reward for the 40 minutes of conversation
that's her
I'm going to now attempt to muster up in a succinct way, because I feel like you've set the bar really high.
I have. It's better be an interesting evening.
Yeah.
Now, also, there will be books. If you haven't got one or you haven't bought it, for absolutely everybody with Christmas coming, please make sure you get yourself one and get it signed at the end. So I was going to call you Phoebe. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Meg will be available for signing at the end, which will commence about 10 past, 8, which is where we will switch off the Zoom. Until then, we're one happy virtual family. Anything else I need to say, Jordan?
You're all good.
Okay, we're being wonderfully supported by the incredible staff and skeleton of Gertrude and Alice. So a huge thank you to everyone here. So let's start at the beginning. You started to talk about Sally Rooney and that you wanted to write something that had a more hopeful feeling, a hopeful ending, which talks about that there was an intention from the get-go. But before we talk about that, let's start back at the beginning and let's talk about conception. Let's talk about the conception of this book. And if I give the date to you, 2018, what does that mean to you?
It's like a sort of haze of, well, I just see it through a film of tears, because what happened in 2018 was, and I'll just keep it absolutely in a nutshell, was that I sat down to begin a book that was, you know, that I was contractually obligated to write. And I had an idea for it, and I'd sold that specific idea, which essentially means you sort of have to write that idea. And I started in January, and by February I had that sort of rising sense that it wasn't working, which I just suppressed it because I didn't have any other idea. And so I had to keep going with that one. And as the months wore on, it just kind of, we were just doing this all the time, like me just trying to push down this absolute fact that it wasn't working and it was too technically restrictive. And I was bored by it myself, which is always a bad sign if I then want people to pay me money for it. I'm like, I personally haven't read it because it's trash and it's boring, but I really hope you enjoy it. And so it's sort of, it kept getting worse. In the actual sessions themselves of writing, I was always in tears by the end because it was so hard and awful. And you kind of know as an author that it's meant to be hard, but it should never have been that hard. And I should have walked away much earlier, but you're sort of, it's all right, I'm conscientious and I'll just keep trying. And it was, and then you've sort of got all of these words that are harder to throw out once you get past a certain point, and then it's due. And so in December, I just got to the end of myself, and I just wrote an email to my publisher, and I attached sort of the 9 chapters out of 10 that I'd been able to do. And I just went, I'm just so sorry. Just please don't read it. I'm not doing anything with it. After I send you this, I'm going to send it. I'm just going to drag the whole thing to trash, which I literally did after. And I said I was sending it to her just so that she couldn't sue me, because I didn't want her to think I hadn't tried. I'd really tried. And it wasn't in a dabbly way. It was truly in a very, anyway. So then I dragged it to trash, and then I just did one of those like slumps where I just I think I did that on my desk for about 6 weeks probably. And told her I wasn't going to try again because it had just been too hard. And even though I'd wanted to always do this and do it full time after sort of journalism as a second career, I just couldn't. And I was so devastated, not just with the waste of time it had been, but just with the fact that I didn't have the thing that I was really, that I really hoped that I had. And so I just went away and tried to sort of, reconstruct an identity without the central thing in it that I wanted. Which didn't happen. And then one day I just the scene that became the first scene in the book just kind of floated down, and I just went away, and I just needed to write that one thing down. And it was that little scene at the beginning with the canapé. And then this book isn't the same one I wrote the year before. Martha's come through from it, but she's completely different. There's some aspects of setting. There's a couple of Christmases that I'd written in a very roundabout way, but otherwise everything's different. And the book itself is so different because the problem with the first one was that I was striving and I was straining to be clever, and I was trying to sound like a novelist, and so I sounded like a bad novelist, you know what I mean, and it was so novelly, and it was just, you know, there was metaphors and adverbs just all over the place, and it was just awful. And so with this one, once it got going and I set these little rules for myself, and the fundamental guiding principle, I think, was just say what happens, like just say it. And so I think if you've read it, you can see that the style is fairly almost like pedestrian in a way, or a bit perfunctory, that she just says, he said this, I said that, he said this. But I think that's kind of more how you relate actual conversations, and the text messages are sort of woven and they're not inset with italics.
No, I'm just going to slow you down.
Yes,
because you're giving away so many intricacies. No, don't worry, I have a big fat list. But there are so many intricacies, and there are so many, you know, important things that you're saying. So I'm just gonna slow it down, if I may.
Absolutely.
I want to ask one quick question for those who are writers and or who want to become writers, and or who struggle with that when we have had a dud, let's call it, or something hasn't turned out the way we thought it would. How did you get back on, like, what was the motivation? How did you get back on the horse or the bike or the donkey or whatever the expression is? Like, what was I know you sort of started to share that then, but how did you do that? Because that's quite an accomplishment.
Well, I think it was just it was just a desperation for this thing I wanted, and not knowing who I was if I didn't achieve it. You know, when you've had this ambition, whatever it might be, and it's sort of crumbling, you just think, can I really let that go? Or does my sort of whole selfhood almost depend on it? And I'm sure I would have found something else, or I would have come at it a different way. But I think it was just that I couldn't help myself, essentially, but I had to be so sideways about it to myself. So I had to be like, it's not a novel, I'm just writing this down, it's not anything. I didn't tell anyone, I didn't tell my publisher, I didn't tell any of my friends for sort of 6 months that I was doing it, because there's so much shame attached to it. You know, when people are like, how's the book going? You're like, like I'd stopped, you know what I mean? It just, you know, when you've been working on it for so long, and, you know, you've been telling people about it and they're expecting it, and then you just suddenly abandon it. And so I just had to trick myself into it sort of every day. But once I set that rule for myself and other rules, which now I've got them on a piece of paper, and they're like written by a mad woman, like so desperate to encourage myself. One of them is genuinely, you've chosen such a great font. Like, honestly, they were that level of positive affirmation, because that's all I had. Like, I had nothing. Do you know what I mean? I was starting from my absolute lowest.
And just and I only want to spend a little moment on this, just because we have such a short amount of time. From a process perspective, I read something brilliant. You have this tool, which I'm not going to give away, to help you to expand on what you started to share, where you write something every day to process your fears. And I just thought can you just share that, because it was such a fantastic tool for everyone any day of the week, literally.
Positive mentions was something I heard about in 30 Rock. I think Alec Baldwin said it, posmens. And so what I do is I literally, because I sit down every day, I'm nervous, and I'm sure everybody is nervous about, you know, what they love and what they want to do, but I'm always nervous. I never feel confident before I start. And so almost to kind of get that out of my body so it doesn't get in the way, I just write down everything I'm scared of, and then I sound like such a nut, but then I respond to it as the fears subside. Then something else rises up where I'm like, it'll honestly be like, I'm so scared. Of course you're scared. Like, do you know what I mean? I want to do this thing. Of course you want. Like, it's really nutty, but it's a little conversation. And then I write for as long as it takes to quiet all of that down. And then I just sort of literally move the piece of paper to one side. I'm so embarrassed. It's really random, but it works.
And it's actually a neurological tool. So you're intuitive and insightful and beyond your years in wisdom. So well done.
It's totally not embarrassing. It's a brand. It's my brand.
It's your brand. Yeah, you own it. It's yours.
Does she? Oh, there you go. Oh, that's good. Oh,
so
okay,
so
amazing.
Let's go.
Everyone
now.
should do posmens then.
Let's go from that. So the 2018 I'm not going to call it a dud.
No. Collapse, existential crisis. You can call it anything.
What did it give you as a starting point when you went in? What did you work out and work through there that you either let go of or embellished or expanded when you came back to round 2? How did that help you set intention? What did you learn about the characters from the dud? Start us there before we start to go into a character conversation.
Well, I think I've actually made it sound too much like it was another draft of the first book, because it wasn't. And when I actually 6 months in decided to show it to my publisher, it was with another note that said, I know that you can't publish this one either, because it's like mad, and it was so different from anything I'd ever done. And it felt at the time really experimental. And now that I'm used to it and it's fully formed, it doesn't look experimental to me anymore. But back then I was like, it's a thing, because it's so different, and it did just start to roll out on its own exactly the way it is. But I think it was actually more, and I said to her, I think at one point, and sorry, this is super inappropriate, but when I gave it to her, I described it as the funniest career suicide note ever written, because I knew she'd sack me after that, because that would be my second dud, and she couldn't keep just letting me endlessly produce duds. And so because I thought it wasn't going to work, I just had total freedom to be like, let's see how much it really isn't going to work. And I just threw everything at it that I wanted to. So what it contains, more than the story of my own life or the story of anything, it's just everything I know. So it isn't me, and it's not my memoir, in disguise, but it's everything I've learned to this point, because I thought this is my last chance to use it, so I might as well throw it all in like some awful dish made with fridge scrapings.
Not really.
But turns out delicious.
There's a couple of things I just love to read. The Sydney Morning Herald wrote, how can something this tender be this dark? How can a book this funny be so sad? The bone dry voice of the narrator captures you on the first page and sweeps you along like a fast moving current. Once you open it, cancel your plans, you won't be putting it down. Meg Mason pulls off an extraordinary feat. And then also the Saturday paper wrote, Sorrow and Bliss, a book you'll want to devour. That was the word everywhere. Devour, 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 devour. In one sitting. Meg Mason has written an adult coming-of-age novel told with force, breathlessness, and confessional style that makes you feel as if you're sharing intimacies with a close friend. I don't know how everybody else felt, but I'm an English person, and in case you hadn't guessed, and one of the things I didn't want it to end, because perhaps it's about how many dysfunctional people there are in my family, or that I think England is so dysfunctional, but it was so akin to the vast ups and downs of normal life, the hope, the hopeless, the joy, the sorrow, all of those different things. How did you find your way to cultivating such extremes?
Cultivating extremes, I think it was because of the throwing it all in element of it. It just was whatever I thought just then. And so I think, all of our lives have extremes within them. And even though I haven't been through the experiences in the book, I've felt emotion on the level of what, goes into the book. So it's like you could write about, someone's death. You might not have experienced that, but you've experienced something that's brought you to that edge of absolute desperation and loss. And, so you can just use all that. But also, I think anything I thought funny, I've collected all of that too. And so it was just, honestly, it wasn't with intention. It was just the only thing I let myself do was use everything. And so I think that's why. And I think even though it is a sad story, I don't see it as one that I've then just tried to put some jokes into to make it bearable. I think it's all just like human life is so sad and so funny, and usually at the same time, or woven through it on a minute by minute basis, rather than you have 6 months of happiness and 6 months of sadness. It's just a big mess.
So the opening scene, and the poor woman stuffing a vol au vent into her mouth, and kind Patrick and Martha going over. So let's dive into the conversation about, for starters, our heroine one minute and something completely different the next. Let's tell us about Martha, and not what was your inspiration, but what was your inspiration?
What was my inspiration? Well, I was starting from this place of hopelessness in my own sort of life. And I remember describing myself to someone at the time as post-hope. When they said, what will you do instead? I was like, nothing. I'm just post-hope. I've gone beyond the point of wishing for anything, and now whatever happens, it just doesn't really matter. And I think that quite sort of, she starts with that resignation, but she also, by exploring the long arc of a marriage, you get to see all of that resilience that's required in a marriage. And I think that because I wanted it to be a romance, I didn't want it to be a mental health book. Obviously there needs to be that in it to tell her story, but I just wanted to show her as this woman who is complicated, evolving, coming of age at 40, not 18, when personally speaking, I was never dumber, I think, than when I was 18. I don't know why coming of age novels are supposedly apply to that age. And I just wanted to show a complex, clever person like all the women I know. Do you know what I mean? And I think I wanted to see a woman who wasn't, you know, a driven career woman, or someone, you know, who was sort of the adult working mother, or just, I felt like I'd seen all of those people, but I was looking for the woman that I see all around me, and, you know, my age group of women, and that's what I see. And I just wanted to find her. And so I think that's where it came from, and her sister as well, Ingrid, and I wanted to see them together because they're quite integral to each other.
Yeah, and so the relationship with Ingrid, her sister, for anybody that hasn't read the book, I thought it was a fascinating landscape you painted in terms of contrast between them. Tell us a bit about that relationship and Ingrid.
Yeah. Well, I think so they're only 15 months apart, and they're sort of co-survivors in this childhood that they both shared. And you know how the ones living in the house are the ones who saw what it was really like. And so they were in this together, and they sort of clung on to each other. But I think what tends to happen, and certainly in my experience, is that as close as you might be to your siblings, life choices gradually drag you in these different directions. And especially if you want to stay close to each other, you need to find commonality, but they're fewer and fewer and fewer. And obviously because Ingrid just has a tremendous number of children, she's taken in this direction, and then Martha doesn't have children, and that's one of the hardest things I think with friends or with anybody, to sort of breach that distance, because your life is so inverse at that point. But I think that they find that, and I think that they fight for that in the same way that Patrick and Martha fight for that marriage of theirs.
I found it really fascinating the way that Ingrid was always her ally, her support, when she suddenly turns against her, where she suddenly had enough momentarily. You have this incredible ability to make these characters, you know, Martha, Celia, unlikable to a degree. I don't particularly like that word, but then take this on this incredible arc and redeemable, where we sort of turn around. What was some of the what inspired you, and how do you find your way to unpacking the story to make them become a more likable character?
Well, I think it's funny, isn't it, because unlikable is the chestnut that's sort of thrown around in fiction, especially at female characters. And whenever I hear it from someone, especially someone who doesn't like Martha, I'm like, who do you like then? Like, who are these likable characters who I'm hearing so much about? Because I personally, like, maybe if I've met one, I haven't remembered them because they're just not interesting to me. And I asked Lionel Shriver about it once when I was interviewing her for a magazine, and she's like, what do they want? Do they want my characters to do charity works, or like, what are they after? And so I get it, but I don't think it's likability. I think it's relatability and seeing something of yourself in this person. And I think insofar as she does unlikable things, she's always confessing them. If you look at the way that she describes this awful thing that she's done, it's always with an element of her apology, or showing you how despicable she thinks it is and how she thinks it's despicable. It's never like, and then I did this. Do you know what I mean? Like, even sort of one of the awfulest things is at the party when she tells Patrick to put his palm cards away. It's followed by that quite seminal sentence of her saying, when did I become like this? When did I become so awful? So she's shocked by how awful she's become. But of course, she's so unhappy. And I know when I've been unhappy, I'm not my best self. Like, I'm just awful. And so, and I think the purpose of Ingrid, and the purpose of especially Ingrid's little sons, is to indicate that there must be something about Martha that we're not seeing. Because why would someone who I have teenage daughters, and if they like someone, they describe them as a skinny legend. Have you heard that? Yeah. So I don't think they mean skinny in an actual sense, but skinny legend is the phrase, and I'm like, Ingrid is a skinny legend, like, to me. So anyway, she must see something in Martha that Martha doesn't disclose to us. She must be more charismatic or funnier or more charming in some way. And she's also more compassionate than she lets on because of the way she treats those little boys. And I think all of those tiny vignettes are things that she deemed precious enough to record. You know, a tiny thing the little boy did about describing a dream or describing his breakfast. And often Martha's compassion comes out with those random strangers that she feels sad for. So that's what all of those characters are there to do, and to show her in a light that makes us think, are we actually hearing the full story from her, or is she just telling us her version, which of course we're so hard on ourselves.
You said in another interview that I watched that in the 2018 there was no mental health issue, and so I'm interested, you know, it obviously just came, and so what was that like for you navigating that?
That was tricky, because then it was there because there needed to be something she didn't know about herself that brought her to this point where everything's about to fizzle, and it needed to be this key thing, and that was what was going to drive her forward in this journey, because I think they're a lovely couple, and I don't think they would have had so much trouble if it wasn't for this, you know, thing that was there from the beginning, that they didn't know what it was, they didn't even know it was there, and of course it's informing everything. And to be honest with you, I don't even know how it became mental health, because once it's in there, it's just set. It's like everything in the novel. Like now when I look at it, I'm like, where did the shipping news come from? Like, did I hear the shipping news that day? And where did the optometrist come from? And it just goes in and it sets like concrete, and you have no memory of where it came and what you were doing on that day. So it must have just evolved, and I went with it. And maybe it's, you know, part of her complication as a character that kind of made sense to me. But
so when you talk about the shipping news, I think of her asleep or trying to be asleep in Oxford. How does you do this wonderful thing with location? You know, we have Belgravia, we have Paris, we have London, we have the house, you know, the two contrasting houses. Where did they come from? Were they parts of experiences that you had from your time in London? How did you come up with them?
Well, definitely living anywhere like that gets your eye in for sort of the type of house that represents the type of person who will be in that house. Oxford, I had family there, and between the 2018 collapse and the 2019 Phoenix from the Ashes type experience, I went there not thinking that I was ever going to write another novel. I just went there to rehabilitate myself and was walking around a lot, just sort of having these thoughts. And so obviously when you sit down to write the novel, then it's like, what about all of this that you've just seen, and you know, this place. And I think probably if you find yourself collecting things, it probably means that you're deep down a writer, and that one day you'll use them, and they just are tiny silly little things, details of, I don't know, the terracotta walls of that house, or the tinfoil in the grill. I've probably seen it somewhere long ago in my subconscious and just kept it because it seemed brilliant and characteristic to me. So I think you hang on to them, and you never need to write them down, don't you think? Once you are looking for them, there they all are, just preciously stacked up.
Let's talk about the female figures. I know that you love writing about the mother-daughter relationship, and I heard you say something that you could write about mother-daughter relationships till the cows come home. There's always something different. There are some remarkable both men and women in this story. So let's talk about the pivotal women, the wonderful character that is Celia. And her, I don't want to say her madness, but her sculpture and her struggle as an art. Tell me a bit about her.
Gosh, she's the one who really I struggle with her a bit. I don't know if I ever found her fully realized. I don't know if I ever quite got why she had a difficult childhood, obviously. She's lost a sister to become her, you know, that Winston's become her mother. So she's lost that, which could have been as close as Martha and Ingrid in a way, couldn't it? That could have been her support in her life, and that was gone. So she had an awful start, and then she's obviously, as we learn more about the condition, there's obviously overlap there. But I think maybe she's where the redemption came from a surprising place. You know, Martha eventually, I'm just going to assume we have all read it. Martha just gets a massive telling off from her mum. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's something that we actually, all of us could probably use every now and again, as someone that close who's earned the right to just bring some home truths. And I think that's maybe what surprised me, and I was really excited when I realized that, oh my goodness, it's Celia who's essentially going to save her. Having wrecked her, she's now going to be redeemed, and all of this redemption is going to flow from that one telling off, but only because they had those 3 months of calls in which she earned the right to sort of, you know, show Martha some reflection.
I don't know how you guys felt, but I was just I felt so passionately about Celia's sister. Her sister,
Winsome.
I always want to call her Sigrid for some reason, but Winsome, I thought I fell in love with Winsome for what she was and what she wasn't, and who we find out she could have been. I thought that was such a very quiet, and the way you write, you know, there's this even the darkest material is handled lightly and is all the more powerful for it, the Guardian said. I thought the way, so subtly, you don't shine so much, but in such little amount, you give so much away. And that particular character, I thought it was, you know, so remarkable and tender.
Sometimes I feel like she was the only adult in the room the entire time. Do you know what I mean? And I think, and she's undervalued by all of them until Martha sees that she's an adult and she's grown up and she's accepted the life that she's sort of made for herself, and she toils for other people, and you know, she's not flamboyant and she's conservative and she can be laughed at quite easily, and obviously Celia does that to her. But also then you think, gosh, look at what she's holding together, the whole operation, you know, and brought Patrick into the family. And I think when I, you know, if I think about my family, I know exactly who does that job. You know what I mean? And so I think there's usually one of, if we're all still together, it's because there's a Winsome somewhere in the background and doing all the wiping. The present, the gift cupboard.
The fact that she has a gift, and she has a gift for her, even in all her mess. So in a moment, I'm just going to open it up in case there are any burning questions. But before we do, I have to talk about the men in her life, from Peregrine, who I like to call Kestrel, depending on what mood I'm in.
He accepts
Jonathan with his tan and his hair.
Jonathan, I know.
Beautiful Patrick, you know, from what's his origin. Really, and her father, this sort of humble, interesting,
failed.
Gentleman. Failed. So tell us about how you balanced or created that range of men in her life.
Well, it's funny because before I did this for the first time, I would hear authors say, and the characters just appear and speak to you and walk around on the page, and I'm like, do they? But they actually do. I'm so embarrassed to say, once you get going, they really do. And Jonathan was, so the first time that you see Jonathan, she said, the first time I got married was to a man called Jonathan Strong. And I was wherever I was up to writing chronologically, and I'd sat down to start that chapter, and I was, was it? Like I genuinely didn't know. It just put itself on the page. And usually you have to think about names and things, but he was just all there with his name. He just wandered on, which naturally now I'm like, that's what Jonathan would do in white jeans. And so so he just appeared, and obviously she needed to have some comparative relationship that she would then, you know, that would crystallize her ideas about what she wanted and what she didn't want. So he served that function, plus just being generally awful and just providing some fun. And then I think Fergus is just the person who wants to help her and can't help her, because and similar to Patrick, who's sort of almost Fergus 2.0, someone said, but just because I think I wanted to show what the impact of mental health is on everyone in the whole circle, as this, you know, the circle gets bigger and bigger, and they suffer obviously as much as she does in different ways. And I think Fergus is that desperate person in the family who would do anything and is completely ineffectual in what he tries to do, and yet so sweet, and you know, and all of them are so forbearing, and I just think, isn't that, this is not the right word, but isn't that romantic? Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't the fact that they all cling on to each other and they're all still there, I think that's where it's hopeful to me. Despite the mess and the awfulness, they are still all present.
And I want to come back to the mental health journey and the conversation, but I'm just so curious, Peregrine, like, where did he present himself on the page? Was he there to create a certain patriarchal figure that she didn't have?
No, well, I think she's got no friends that you see who are women. Like, she confesses that up the front, the fact that all the people at her party are Patrick's friends because of the children, they're not having children thing. So it seems sensible to me that she would go and find someone who definitely, you know, was not going to become a mother on her. Do you know what I mean? And so I think there he is. And I think I probably have come across people like him in the magazine world when I was there. But I think I did actually afterwards. I'm like, shivers, have I written Rupert Thomas, who's married to Alan Bennett, who's the, he's the editor of World of Interiors and he's the playwright. And I actually said to someone at HarperCollins, I was like, should we just run that past legal, just in case that's a bit too close? But I put enough non-identifying details in there. But he's just one of those amazing people that you collect who are there, and enter and exit for a time in your life that is so determined by them. And and that's her. I think that's the first friendship that we see and the most significant friendship that we see, because she's got Ingrid, so she really doesn't need anyone else. But then there's this amazing, sort of man that she just, a little rescue.
And
in the
an older man as well.
Yeah.
I want to open up in a moment and invite some questions. So if you have something specific that you want to share, be ready. And if there's anything coming through there. But did you feel a sense of obligation in how you manage the whole dialogue around her mental health? For 20 years, she's trying to find out, the question we often all ask ourselves, what is wrong with me? So what was that like for you to have that creative freedom to just let the characters take you and the story take you, but to also have that in the background, if it was there for you?
Well, obviously for those first 6 months no one was ever going to see it, so it was an absolute free-for-all in terms of writing mental illness and making it as grim or true or gruesome or awful or funny as I wanted to make it. But then suddenly when I did send it to my publisher, and she took a long time coming back to me, and she disputes this, but I know she didn't like it when she first saw it, because she would have seen what it used to be and what it was now and be like, what has happened?
Were you writing to notes to yourself every day?
Exactly. So but I think after that, when I was like, it's going to be a book, then I had to revise the entire thing, because I'm like, I'm taking an enormous amount of responsibility onto myself to be like, I'm going to now speak for the mentally ill. Do you know what I mean? Like, who is that person? And I'm going to represent their experience accurately. Like, that felt huge, and something that I didn't trust myself to do in a way that could, and obviously, I'm sure we all know how the diagnosis is handled. I think it's safe to say how I've got around that problem. But once I realized that I wanted to do it, which I call, that I redacted it.
And just for anybody that hasn't read the book,
go and make
when
a
we
cup of tea.
when we finally find out, and actually it's in print everywhere, when we finally find out what is the condition of Martha, we don't actually find out what the diagnosis is, which is I thought for some people was really frustrating. For me personally, I thought it was tremendous because of the lack of labeling or any aspect of that. Is there anything more behind it for you?
Well, there was, it was a decision I made. It was a decision that answered 3 problems that I hadn't found a solution to. And the first one was that I didn't want to misrepresent anyone's experience. That was really important. The second one, like completely entree new, is that I didn't want any vulnerable people to see themselves in her experience and to potentially think, I've got that, or I'm going to do what she did, or I should describe myself as having something wrong with me, which is her language. You know what I mean? It's not what I would ever have said about Martha. So that was really, really important. And then creatively, I didn't want it to be the schizophrenia book, the bipolar book. You turn it over on a shelf like this and you see, someone has narcissistic personality. You're like, well, I'm not interested in narcissistic personality, so I'll put that away, because it's a bigger story than that. But it just meant as well, once I'd done it, and I know it annoys people, and I feel sorry about that, but at the same time I'm like, well, imagine how annoying it was for her. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the whole point, that you should forgive her a lot of what you've seen and found unlikable, because you only spent 300 pages on it and she spent 20 years on it. And so I thought it was quite a good way to force a bit of empathy.
But it also makes, I don't know, there are so many aspects, especially with Celia, that I could relate to with parents and things like that. Because we don't know, I felt like you made it more relatable. Like it wasn't a specific diagnosis, so therefore it could have been a number of different things for many more people to relate to.
And I think because I've had every possible suggestion from people who have projected their own experience into it, which I think is brilliant to be able to do that. So it just means that you can find whatever you have in your own life and put it in there if you want to. So I think it's been really interesting, and I've been really interested to know how people have responded to it. So tell me what your reaction was. But also, because somebody said, I was so cross the first time it happened, and then after that, it was just a fact. just became a fact in the book that it was just a line.
Mm.
The only difficult part was the audiobook.
Which it was, I read it was an X.
Yeah.
An X marks the spot.
Exactly.
Brilliant. So let's open up the audience, and if there's anything specific coming through, can you bellow it out at me? Again, keeping it really specific. Who here has a question about any of the things we've talked about, or something completely separate, or just you love the book and you want to share that, or you hated the book and you want to share that? Who has anything they'd like to share?
It's always
hard
to
question.
Yes.
I'm going in, and I hope this comes out succinctly.
Oh no, seriously, I've set the bar so low for succinctness. Yeah.
But I keep telling people, and look, everyone in this room is kindred spirits. They're all big readers. I keep telling everyone I know that it's like one of the best books I've ever read. And then Kate and I talked about this. We don't know what to say. Why we love it so much, and then you find yourself going, oh, I know it's about depression, and there's stuff about it that makes you feel a little bit like exposing. And so I wonder what that's like for you, because now hearing you say that, it's not a personal necessarily, necessarily something that is autobiographical, but does that feel exposing to you, that people are at you for your personal?
I'm just going to repeat the question.
Yes,
so I just don't apologize. That's okay. And actually, it's really great. There's two questions that one of our audience members suggested. The first is, I love this book and I kind of want to recommend it to everyone, but I don't really know how to describe it. Like, what do I say it is? And also, now that Meg shared that it's not autobiographical, and yet people assume that, can that be invasive? Can that be boundary crossing? So if you could, sorry, I've just got to repeat
they were really good questions.
Well said. Well said. And I'm saying it not for you. I'm saying it for the audience that's on Zoom, just so you know.
Can you summarize my answer in the same way?
Let's go.
What Meg was trying to say was, no, I don't know what it is either. And actually, it's weird because now that it's gone into the Northern Hemisphere and people who I've never met and will never see are sort of, responding to it, and it's been quite overwhelming, I'll sometimes look at it and I'll be like, what is it that you're looking at?
Yes,
because I'm not sure, like, is that because there's nothing there really? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just bits. And but it's not, but I know you mean. But I can't even describe what it is either, which is, why I struggle to even, submit it, because it's just so piecey and there's all of these things and it's and tiny bits that I thought I would only find funny. So I don't know what it is either. So that's great. None of us do. And
phenomenon, as Oprah would say.
Exactly. Let's use that. Let's go with Oprah.
Can you expand a little bit? I watched a great interview where you were like, particularly women get asked whether a book is autobiographical. I'm not sure why that is. And you said that it can feel invasive, but tell us a bit about, not that it's autobiographical, but which characters at this particular point in life, not 6 months ago, because it changes, right? When you write something, how you felt about it a month ago, or what you wrote, you might maybe interpret differently. So when you look at the characters or some of the issues they're facing, or the arc of the love story, the ups and downs of both Patrick and Martha, like, what is most, and maybe it's all of the things, what is most relatable to you, or are you most fond of or moved by with a bit of time on this side?
That's a really good question. To shortly answer the first one is that I was so braced for that autobiography question that I just rolled with it. Like, there was no way I wasn't going to be asked it, and I totally respect it because it's interesting. And obviously, if you relate heavily to any aspect of the book, and of course the mental health aspect, you want to know what if the person knows what they're talking about, and if they know what you have felt as well as you do. So of course, but I was never willing to do that to the book, to kind of invade the book in that way. And that's why even to my publisher I was like, no author photo, can I please have nothing at the back? I don't want any acknowledgements. I just want it to finish, and then it's not like, ta-da, I'm here at the end. You know what I mean? It was all me the whole time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just wanted it to be, this is Martha's whole thing, and it exists. So even at the very beginning of all the publicity, when I would sort of start to find myself saying, oh, well, that's a snippet of conversation I had with someone or whatever, I realized it was just crumbling every time so it was like, that's me, that's not me, that's me. It was just falling apart. And I'd worked so hard to make this a whole story that it doesn't matter if it was me or not, and maybe it was to begin with, and it very quickly evolved. You know, you take bits and pieces, and so it evolves away. Which is, to answer your question, is that I think the part that I love is that she's 40 and that she starts out hopeless, because of course that was absolutely me for all sorts of different reasons. And I had to be 40 to write the book. That's what I loved about it, is that it made all of the learning that I had done in my own life up till 40. I was like, oh, I have learned something, and I'll put it in, and I do know some things, and I have worked hard to find some of these lessons. And so I think that's really important to me. And I that was a really useful experience to almost crystallize what I realized I had worked out in my own life.
So that's that sort of starting point, also acknowledging that we all think we're going to be somewhere at a certain age, and we get to 40 and it's like, really, I'm here, I'm just starting out.
Exactly.
Relatable, you talked about the word relatable. I'm gonna punctuate the balcony scene, which I feel like a bit like that sort of cheesy scene in Titanic where they're at the front. When I read the balcony scene, not Titanic, that was misleading. It spoke so loudly to me, whether it was of the dark thoughts that you momentarily maybe have but never engage with, or the dark thoughts that we see that those we love around us who are struggling with. There are so many little moments through Martha's journey particularly, or what Celia didn't become, where we see so many relatably sad, challenging moments. And I don't know how the audience felt, but for me it was not only like seeing or being around an old friend, but it was about feeling acceptance that this is what goes on. And then some deeply inappropriate joke or comment, 2 lines later.
Courtesy of the skinny legend, probably.
Courtesy of the skinny legend. One thing you do, or everything you do, is done magnificently, but what you do so remarkably is go from absolute pain to humor and an edge and a sharpness in such close proximity. Is that your personality?
Yeah, I think so, but it's also my experience, because haven't you sat with friends and they're sobbing and then you're all laughing? Do you know what I mean? Like, it all is mingled in, and I think that's the brilliant thing about women in particular. But I think that where it comes from, and I'm sure the writers in the room will know this, it's just specificity. That's all that you need to do in order to capture those moments. So you could never say someone was on a balcony, I would never articulate, I'm about to do this. You know what I mean? She would never say what she's thinking of doing, but somehow the fact that she's got bare feet and it's nighttime and she can feel the grill floor and it's a bit wonky and rusty just shows you that that's a pivotal moment that could really go either way. And so I think that's how you do it, is to just, in the book, and this is probably why we can't see what it is, to just shrink it and shrink it and shrink it, and to get it so much smaller, and to bring it down to the chairs falling over and the boiled eggs and the you know what I mean, like to make it not
Tiniest
make it
detail.
grand, because it isn't grand, it's just our daily lives. And I think that's what I wanted to do, is make it as real as I possibly could by making it as specific as I possibly could.
This is a segue away, but congratulations, because it's just been bought in London.
Yes,
fantastically after the bonkers of 2020. I, not realizing that we had sort of met in a room before, I read it thinking you were 100% English. I thought the tonality was English. I was so surprised that you were bloody Australian, born in New Zealand.
Well, I'm bloody not Australian.
Sorry.
I actually know. I thought I was, and it was only this year that, for some reason to do with the book, I had to find out my residency status. Turns out I've been on a temporary visa for 24 years. And so I'm actually basically an alien at this point. I'm stateless. And so I'm essentially semi-bloody Australian, deeply New Zealand. I don't belong anywhere and can't go anywhere. But I'm so glad that you said that, because that was one of my absolute anxieties, of choosing to set it somewhere that I haven't been for a long time and couldn't go, and to check that it was authentic, because tiny mistakes are so, like, I read a book set in New Zealand written by an American and there was a snake in it, and I'm like, well, that's trash, because we don't have those. And why didn't you check with a New Zealander? So literally when it was coming out, I was like, every English person I know was being sent one, someone who lived in Wales, because I needed that slag heap to look, whatever. So I'm like, because one tiny thing will give it away. And a friend wrote to me and she's like, we don't call them jackhammers, we call them pneumatic drills. And I'm like, absolutely, like straight into the thing. So that's how I swindled you, was with the help of many people.
question.
In which case, to totally ruin the question I was about to ask.
No, ask it
What I was
anyway.
going to ask is, from your accent, I was like, oh, she's English. I got it. So
Yeah.
what I was going to say is that, was there a risk that by being English, your humour wasn't going to translate? Because for me, it nailed it. I was saying to the girls earlier that it was bang on for that kind of older, pessimistic English woman. It was just so
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, I can't wait to find out she's English. And as soon as I sat down, I thought, well, she's English. Of course, that's why it was
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
You need to write a review. You need to put that on the back cover.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
Right there,
How did
Totally.
you nail it in such a way that, I mean, I'm 30. I know lots of pessimistic 40-year-old English women.
Yeah.
But how did you nail it in such a way without that context, that you've got the English humour down to an absolute T, and
I'm
made it
just
so
gonna repeat it.
relatable as well?
Yes.
So just to repeat the question was, how did you, and I loved it, definitely an English woman in the audience saying this, what did you say? What was the description you just used? You got it bang on. No, you got it bang on, because that's so English. I love it. But how did you nail on the head so specifically the relationship with the pessimistic English 40-year-old? The audience member coming from England,
Yeah.
and it being so relatable to an English person,
Yeah.
that sense of humor as well. Is that from your experience there? Is that from you channeling it? What is it?
Well, thank you for saying that, because obviously that was a huge concern of mine, that it wouldn't fly, and so I'm really grateful that to know from an English person that it did. But I wasn't worried about people here understanding it, because that was the other part of your question, was I worried that it wouldn't translate. I'm a little bit worried about what will happen in America, because obviously unless we really beat that Fleabag drum, they might be expecting something cheerier, or with a happier ending, although to my mind it does have a happy ending. But anyway,
I think it's already cast. It's got Laura Linney. They're going to completely make it as a TV series. I can see it, the remake.
Who knows? Yeah, but it was brilliant, because you spend so much time afterwards trying to write a blurb and trying to describe it really concisely, and people always want an elevator pitch and things like that, and you've obviously spent a year writing this expansive thing, so to boil it down is really difficult, and I've never been able to do it. And then on Instagram someone said they were writing about it, and their summary was, British woman has a shit time in life surrounded by a technicolor cast of characters. And I'm like, that's all I want it to be, is British woman has a shit time in life. And I think probably it's because I just absolutely fed myself on like Victoria Woolf and French and Saunders, Victoria Wood, growing up. That was just what I watched from a really weirdly inappropriately young age, and that was what I've always like. I interviewed Joanna Lumley once and fell apart in the most unprofessional way, and I told her, and she was just like, that I was like a big girl when I was growing up, and I used to bike in the rain in my tiny New Zealand town to Movie World to keep renting the same videos of French and Saunders over and over again. Can you imagine massive me on a bike, like just going to get my videos and bringing them home to watch? Like, it's such a pathetic picture, but it worked. It all went in. And then, because I was rewatching some Victoria Wood the other day, and these sketches that she did like 20 years ago, she did this one about a channel swimmer called Chrissy, who was this girl who was 12, and she was going to swim the channel, but it only evolved slowly over the course of the 5-minute sketch that no one was helping her. She just decided to do it, and her parents didn't come down to see her off and didn't know when she was going to turn up again. And I'm like, that is dark, but bleak. So funny. Bleak, and you would never get that in an American show. That mixture of awfulness and humor is just, it's like, how black can you make it before we can't handle it anymore?
So bleak, and how bleak can you make it before you can't handle anymore? Fascinatingly, where it ends up with Patrick and Martha. So I'd love to hear from you, before anybody else has any more questions. What inspired that choice to essentially bring them back?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 to end where it does. I knew that I was going to get them to that point, and I knew I wasn't going to take them any further, because I wanted to, well, first of all, you can't tie it off so neatly, because that'll just, nothing ever gets tied off that neatly. But I think that the fact that what they're in, Patrick describes it as injury time. So it's all a bonus from here. I wanted to show that over that arc of that marriage, where they've both worked so hard, after their own fashion, as best they can, that they are rewarded with something that wasn't the thing they necessarily wanted, and it wasn't what it looked like, but it's something else, and it's, you know, it is stronger, and that's where all the sculpture, you know, comes in, that Celia makes to kind of mark it. But it just, I think in my experience, that's how life works, is that if you are utterly tenacious, you will get something out of that, but it won't be the thing that you thought. It won't look like how you wanted it to necessarily, and it's whether you can accept that, make something out of it, be grateful for it, roll with it fundamentally. And so that's why I need everyone else to decide what they think happens after that. And someone asked me, do they think Martha got the thing that she wanted? And I realized I'd never thought about it. I didn't know, and I still don't know.
The ambiguity is beautiful. It just creates hope, you know, that left with hope. Questions? Okay, so we've got 2 questions. All right, so I'm just going to just go quickly because I don't want to leave our Zoom gang out, and then I'm going to come to you both. So Jordan, could you shout for us?
Yes, I've got a question from Sarah, who asks, the way you were able to bring descriptions to life and convey so much meaning in so few words blew me away. Does that come naturally to you, or is it something you've consciously worked on?
Oh, well, I think we can all tell that I don't save words when I'm using them out my mouth. No, I think it just needed to be, it was the process of making it smaller and smaller and clearer, and more specific. It got shorter and shorter. And so there are things as well that actually, one thing that no one's ever noticed or asked me about, and tell me if you noticed this, that Ingrid's sons don't have names. Did you notice that? They're never named. Only the daughter Winnie is ever named.
No, because the intricacies of their little hands or what they're doing has that intimacy. So
so that was a way to make it quick. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't want it to feel like there's this big crowd of children that you need to individually get to know these children, and what's this boy like and what's that boy like. It was just to be emblematic of Martha, and so things like that help you bring it down, because if I gave them a name, I'd have to give them much more of a backstory and much more physical description and things. So it was leaving out things like that that I thought made it snappy.
Could that be elements of your journalistic training coming through from a strategic point of view, or not at all?
Oh, I don't know. I've never really, the two are so distinct to me, like, you know. And you said you'd heard somewhere that I point one way on my desk when I'm writing magazines, and then I transition and point the other way. Like, in the madness of the Posmans, the desk move, and they're wearing the same thing every day, so I don't have to think about it, like Obama. Anyway, so yes, I think probably there is some distillation that you learn to do, because you're terrified as a novelist of overstaying your welcome. And I think one of the hardest things to hear is when people say it was a bit long, and you're like, okay. Sorry, I gave you too much.
So let's go, and thank you, Zoom person.
Yes,
that was a terrific question. What's your question?
So you describe things, it feels like things are like coming to you at random points. I kind of wonder whether you had a kind of vision for where the story was going to go at the start or during it, or you were like, oh wow, maybe Martha actually did want children all along at some point, or did you know it all along? Like,
I'm just going to repeat that. So it's the elements to the question. So the first element is, did you have a clear vision for what you wanted to write? And the second part is, or did they just kind of come and you realize certain aspects, like Martha didn't want to have children? You know, what was your process, or was it both?
I think I knew the end point. I knew I was going to start bringing them back together, but not complete the bringing them back together. And so from the wedding with the canapé to there, it was sort of the straight line that I was working to, but things like that did definitely surprise me. And the children thing came out of the fact that this mental health had to really have cost her something. It couldn't just be, I was a bit miserable sometimes. It had to be so that it could be as catastrophic on their marriage, you know, as it was going to be. It needed to be something that was possibly irredeemable, just to raise the stakes, I guess. But again, shipping news, don't remember where it came in or when. I should write better notes next time, because I reckon I probably lie as well when people at things like this ask me. I'm like, yes, I remember when that came in, and I'm like, I think it was another time. So yeah, because it's all so muddled up in your mind. Yes, so a general sense of exactly where I was going, but not how I was going to get there, I think.
And your question?
More a comment, I suppose. I don't know how you respond to this, but I was surprised to hear you mention just now that to you that her father is a failed man, because to me he is this like strong, beautiful character that knows exactly what to do with her all along and kind of just always gets it right. But then I'm sitting here thinking, well, maybe he actually kind of
didn't get it right because he allowed it
Yeah.
rather than
Can I
Yeah.
being more proactive.
Yeah.
can I repeat that, because
Yeah, it's a
that's
really
like
good
such a like
Yeah.
speaks to my heart so much. So the question was, because earlier you talked about her father. I've forgotten his name. Fergus,
yeah,
sorry.
the poet.
The poet.
A
About
poet,
a
actually,
poet.
sadly, yeah.
A poet.
Not the sculptor. A
Talked
poet,
about
yeah.
Fergus being a failure. And the audience member just talked about that being surprising, because she thought that Fergus was this, you know, incredibly present father that was always there for Martha and always had, you know, the support. And I'd add to that, I felt so challenged for him because of that person that supports another person with mental health. You know, how he moved out with the washing basket, leaving Celia, and then when he was welcome would move back in.
I know, which
so,
Martha asks him why, doesn't she, in the end, why he did that. The disparity between
you writing him as a failed poet, and whoever, our perception of actually feeling hugely adoring of him.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I do adore him too. And I obviously
will still speak to you.
Yeah, exactly. I would never say a word against Fergus. I mean, I just did, obviously. But I mean, failed in his ambition. And obviously that's thrown off the dynamic in their marriage, because Celia clearly has sort of been sabotaging his career, subconsciously probably, in her own flamboyance. But I think he is incredible for Martha, and I love the moments between them that are the really small things, with the alphabet game that they play, and you know that carries forward to become something she does with Peregrine. And so he is seeding in all this value and all this beauty, and he's there, and he takes her to the doctor, and he's absolutely tireless, which is then all echoed in Patrick as well. That's obviously the kind of man that she's used to, and the kind of man that Jonathan absolutely could not be less. But I think it's to see everyone's limitation in the extent to which they can care for the people around them. So Celia can tell you off and then make you a sculpture, but she can't mother you for your entire life. And Fergus can't fix you and heal you, but he'll drive you there, and he'll get you ice cream on the way home. And it's all a bit heartbreaking, and you suspect we're all so limited, I think, in the way that we can help each other. And it's just accepting the extent to which we can be and help each other.
And that wonderful kind of conversation of how people show their version of love, which I think is beautifully done with Fergus. So any more online questions in the audience? Go ahead.
My question is kind of technical.
I love technical questions.
Put it into real words.
Vashti will do it for you.
Sign.
Yeah,
we can sign.
Outsource it. Just outsource it.
You're right. So you're in this creative zone, and characters appear on the page, and characters develop. But it seems to me that you then almost have to go into the rational part of your brain and say, this is where the book's at. This is what I need to make it work better to get to this outcome. Like, how do you swap between super creative, almost irrational kind of, it's just magic what's coming out of the page, to then this book needs structure at some point. And is that you? Do you go back and read it every night and sort of hate what you've written, or find the gaps? How do you punctuate the creativity to then get a book that's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and rounds out?
Well, that was one of the rules. Don't read what you wrote yesterday. Because I had learned in that process that when you're struggling, how it usually will manifest is that you'll just chapter one, polish it and polish it and polish it and try to fix it endlessly for 6 months. Do you know what I mean? And there's nothing in it that's of use. So you need to write the full arc of the story, as dreadful as that kind of is, because by the time you get to the end, you'll be like, oh, Ingrid would never say that, the thing that I've made her say in chapter one, because you know these people so much better by then, and they've made various choices that, you know, that have got you some way to there. But I think it probably is a mixture of rational, and it's things that actually probably I had them do that then I just took the whole thing out. Do you know what I mean? If they ever started to diverge, because it was quite vignette-y and it was quite sectional, you could just lift those bits out. They were just wrong and they shouldn't have been there. But maybe in writing them, it made me realize what they should do. You know what I mean? Like, you're sort of
the process.
Experimenting and being like, it's a process of elimination almost, of like, would they actually have that conversation? You know, would Fergus be really mad with Martha when he finds out that she hasn't told Patrick about her diagnosis? Or would he just be, you know, react the way he does, which is to be very fractionally disappointed in a way that she's absolutely devastated by because of the relationship that's built up between them? You know, like Fergus's sort of disapproval is absolutely crushing to her, with her mother can go in a complete rage and she ignores it. But I think it's a process of elimination and just getting to know them so well over the course of really a year. So,
but it's also that interesting duality of, I think when Lucy was interviewing Trent Dalton, by the way, I'm pointing up to Trent Dalton's books up there as opposed to him. He's just up here. He talks about you write with your heart and then you edit with your head.
Yeah.
And one of the dangers as writers you can get into is trying to create perfection from the get-go and then not having any material.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. What I thought about when you were speaking then is, because this is not an autobiography. You have some more to keep.
Is this yours or
that's
mine?
yours. That's yours.
It just magically
no, I keep refilling it every time you're talking. Because it's not autobiographical. Because there is almost some. I know you said that you appear in all the characters in different parts, but there's almost that objectivity one can have when one lets the characters come to life and then steps back, the duality of, okay, how do I structurally make this right? Because it's not pouring your guts out or tearing your heart out on the page. Did that give you more capacity to be more objective?
Possibly. And I've actually just remembered I wrote a whole first novel. Do you know what I mean? Like actually that was the process. I forgot about that part where I spent a whole year not getting it right and a whole year working out who these people, the ones that carried forward, who they were and who they definitely weren't. So that was, none of that was wasted in the end, although it felt devastatingly wasteful at the end of that process. But I can see now what I was working out in my mind by going on such a tangent sort of exploration. So definitely, if you write and there's waste, it probably isn't waste in the end. Do you know what I mean? Like, it feels awful to bin 10,000 words or whatever it is, but it was to get you to what you then discovered. Am I consciously rational about my characters? Is that what you said? I just blanked.
We can move past that. We can go. I have a few more questions that is there any?
It was a really good one though.
You've got one more question. Don't be sorry. I've got a few more, and then we're gonna.
I know you said it's not autobiographical.
Biographical.
Yeah.
But I must know if you have a sister, because to me this is like the realest, most relatable sister relationship.
I don't. No, I don't.
So let me just repeat that.
Again, I think maybe that's my relationship with my sister.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love most.
Yeah.
So let me recount that again. The beautiful conversation, a question about Fergus, and the audience member being in disbelief that you don't have a sister and that there is an element of autobiographical writing because of it having such wonderful elements of that sisterly sibling relation. And this is what's so relatable about the book. This is what's so amazing about the book. There are so many relationships that or situations that one can't believe aren't part of your life. And for anyone that knows me, I have to just always ask the most monotonous, annoying, deepest, gut-wrenching, inappropriately boundary-crossing question. And then I did some research on Meg, and I listened to you really poignantly talking about it not being autobiographical and how people want it to be because it meant so much to them. You know, so this is one of the fantastic things that you have accomplished, which I am not the first person to say, which is you've written this piece, this body of work that allows everybody to feel connected to it. And as you said, you just want to buy it for everyone. Somehow you don't quite know what to say because you don't want them to think that you're calling them bonkers or, you know, but it is one of those books that somewhere we can all relate to.
I hope so. That's
so
lovely.
There's two more quick questions I want to ask before we start to round off this, and there is the opportunity to get a book, buy a book, and have your book signed.
I already have one, but thank you.
You do? That's good.
I borrowed it from someone. Yeah.
I'm happy to sign on your behalf.
No, it's a library copy. I love it. Everyone's so sweet when they say I'm going to buy it for everyone, and I'm like, thank you, because other people say, oh, I'm just lending it to everyone. I'm like, that's a shame, isn't it? It's like, it's good. They might buy one in the end, but it's sort of my livelihood, but that's fine. Like, it's all right.
No, buy one and buy a few. I've given away 2 copies already. Okay, so there are 2 quick questions.
Lend it to everyone. I really don't.
In terms of this crazy year, I remember at the beginning of last year in my work, it was all about 2020 vision. What are you going to do with this year? It's going to be
sit inside.
Yeah, it's going to be your year. The question I want to ask you is, personal and professional, how has this year challenged and inspired you, both personally and creatively, and as an author who is publishing a book?
Yes, well, it's been amazing. It's felt like the class of 2020 with any author that's had a book coming out this year, because it was anxiety producing when you've worked on something for so long that if you'd just been quicker, you could have picked the pandemic. Do you know what I mean? Like, but so that was suddenly became a fact that it was going to be muddled up and all of that. But it didn't so quickly become the status quo in a way that you're just like, oh, I guess this is what it's like. You just do lots of Zoom things, and everybody's been amazing. And so that's all been much less of a worry once it actually happened. I think personally what I learned was, because I live in a very delicately tiny little house with 2 teenagers and a husband and a dog, and the night that we found out that last Friday, like the Sunday night we found out that Friday was the last day of school for some indefinite period, I just sat there and I was like, because I'm used to having 40 hours a week alone when I do my work, and it was going to drop to 0 instantly. Like I'd actually already had my last hour of alone time for 6 months, whatever it was. I just didn't know it. And I just sat there and I was like, this can just go one of 2 ways. And it's either going to be awful or it's going to be sort of Spirit of the Blitz around here. And we decided for that one. And so there was an absolute moratorium on complaining in any level. So I wouldn't complain to friends. I wouldn't be on text threads that were complaining in their nature. I wouldn't complain about anything. And it actually came true in a sense. It wasn't unbearable because it was bad for everybody. So what's the point? It's like saying I'm really tired. It's like, are you? Gosh, you're the only person in the room. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I just learned what you can actually withstand without having to, that you can actually, we can be quite stoical. Do you know what I mean? I don't think our generation's necessarily been raised with stoicism as a virtue, but it's an incredible virtue. And I think probably because I was still writing this book up until July when it was meant to be out, I took out a little bit of extra time. There is a bit of a theme of toughness and stoicism in it, and sort of, I think probably that's the big lump of 2020 learning.
Well done, and well done for pushing it out. And we're actually very lucky because this is her first in person.
It's my re-entry into the world. Thank you so much for coming, all of you. It's just great.
I've got one more question.
Sorry.
Last question.
Yes.
Don't finish it off. Last question. If you were going to write another book, to your question of do you have a vision, or what things do you want to cover? What things do you want to explore? What can we get the intel? What would be your next passion to write about?
Yeah, well, one of the ways that I severed the connection between 2018 and 2019, the actual key was to put it into the first person, to make Martha tell it, because the previous one had been third person. And and one of my anxieties about that was that I just was copying things I'd done before but worse. So You Be Mother, which I'd written, it kept becoming like a poor man's You Be Mother, and I was like, that's, you know. And so to make sure that didn't happen, I just had to switch point of view, and you simply cannot repeat yourself, because then for example the character has to be in every scene. You can't have a single scene that she's not in. So that means that she, you know, it just changes what you describe and how you describe it. So this one, to make sure that I will not repeat myself, because I don't want to try and write another story of this. I don't want to, you know, I can't bear the idea of copying this in any way. So I will write it set all in one day, and I'll write it in the present tense, or I'll do something that's really different that forces me to learn a whole different way to go. And I think I'm going to set it in New Zealand, but I think that might just be because I'm homesick at the moment. So maybe by the time I'm going, if I can one day go back, I'll be like, oh no, that's right. That's why I left.
You'll go back and you're like, the reason I left.
Yeah, exactly.
Meg Mason.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that, hopefully that's what's next. But gosh, it's intimidating, and I have to find a way to uncouple from this one before I can sort of do it, which is a skill I'm not sure.
I think you've got a little bit of legwork before then, now that you're unleashed into the world and you've just sold in London. And I thought about it briefly, but one of the books I love the most is a book called Brother of the More Famous Jack. Have you heard of that? It's by Barbara Trapito. I'm obsessed with it.
Gilbert recommended that one as well.
Oh, there you go. She just got her fingers in every pie.
So let me just, the last question that Meg was asked was, would she consider a sequel? And
well, so anyway, so sorry, that book, Brother of the More Famous Jack, which I so heartily recommend, and Maria Semple was all into it as well. I think she wrote the foreword on the new edition. But that was the book that so amazingly showed me that you should fill your heartbreaking scenes full of jokes and make sure the funny scenes are devastating in some way, because that's what is real life. And it's, to me, I remember it as a funny book, but there's a baby who dies in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you would never say, I'm going to write a really funny book with a dead baby in it. Like, that's just, but she does it somehow. And it's one line. You get one line that this baby has died. Sorry, you were probably going to read it and there's no need to now. But anyway, it's amazing. But she wrote a sequel to it and it just wilted to me. And it was more than I needed to know and what I wanted to know. And I was so sad that I'd read it, which sounds awful. I'm sure lots of people loved it, but that Brother of the More Famous Joke felt so whole and perfect and full how it was, that I'd be scared to sort of dick around with it. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe, and I might one day. Maybe Ingrid will get her own.
You might have to for the TV series.
Yeah,
now, what I'd like to do is I want to just share the up and coming events that we have got in a moment. But before I do, I would like to acknowledge you for bringing together all aspects of where you've been, what you've done, what you've learned, the ups and the downs, the hope and the hopelessness in cultivating what is just a phenomenal piece of work in Sorrow and Bliss.
That is so kind of you.
And thank you for sharing your time with us.
Oh my gosh, you guys all, it's just amazing that you're here, and I know how busy you are, and you're all here, and I bet there were babysitters involved, and there was parking and showers and probably, I hope, fake tans. We're all very pale in the inner west, so I'm seeing a lot of just
this is Bondi, are you kidding? We're not pale here.
Exactly. So no, there's been a lot of preparation and everything to get here, so thank you everybody. I really appreciate it.
And we want to support Meg, so don't lend your book if you can.
Terrible. I sound so bitter.
Buy your book, get your book signed, buy 15 books, go for it. And we're going to be doing signings. Meg is going to be doing, we're not going to do it together, joint signings at the end. Before I go on, I want to acknowledge Gertrude and Alice, which is such an important part of our community and is so special to me, and the amazing Jordan and Kate and Jane and all the incredible staff that run around, and it's just magnificent little Aladdin's Cave of wonder that is Bondi would not be the same without. The up and coming events that we've got is Boy on Fire with Mark Mordew tomorrow night, in case you can make it for that. We've got Joan Fedler, The Unbecoming, on the 3rd of December. Ronnie Khan is coming back for round 2 of A Repurposed Life on the 8th of December. We've got Hamnet, we've got Maggie O'Farrell. She won't be joining. The author is not joining.
No,
she's in the UK. She's so selfish. She could have done quarantine. That's on the 10th. All tickets are available through Eventbrite. Get them, join, and make sure you follow the Bondi Literary Salon to know what is going on. So I'd like you to put your wonderful hands together and give Meg a fantastic hand. We just want to say thank you for joining us on Zoom and for showing up and being here, and we hope you've had a wonderful evening. We're going to cut you off shortly, so thank you and good night.